Okay, so this video is going to discuss how to simplify numerical expressions, and the primary topic of this video will be using order of operations. We're also going to talk about the distributive property. So let's get started. So simplifying numerical expressions is our topic, and our primary learning objective is to simplify numerical expression with order of operations. So that's the primary focus of our thing, order of operations. But there is this thing called the distributive property that we will also talk about. Here you see the full name of the property, the distributive property of the real number multiplication over addition. That is a mouthful. We will just simply call it the distributive property in our class. When we get to that part of our notes, we'll talk about why it has that great big giant name briefly for just a second. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I want to do is kind of take a case in point. Why do we need an order of operations? What is the reason for that? So let's consider if I have 7 plus 3 times 5 as an expression. There are two operators here. Operators are just the things that are telling you what to do with the numbers. So there's an addition operator and a multiplication operator. Now, if I were to choose to do the additional operator first, I would have 7 plus 3, which gives me 10, and 10 times 5 would give me 50. So that would be one way that I could potentially do the problem. However, if I did the multiplication operator first, then I would have 7 plus, and then 3 times 5 is 15, and 7 plus 15 is 22. So notice I get very different answers depending on which way I do it. So because of the fact we get very different answers, it is necessary to establish kind of an agreed upon set of rules that all mathematicians will use when they are solving a problem. And the order of operations is the rules that we use. Now, as we go through our class, we will talk about some shortcuts and some ways to sort of get around the order of operations, but these are the basic rules that always work. They never fail. So whenever you're in doubt, this is what you should go to, all right? The order of operations. There are 4 steps to the order of operations, and it is absolutely necessary that you know these cold as you work through the problems in our class. We will use them probably literally on every single problem that we do in our class. The first thing that you always do is grouping symbols. Now, it is possible, if you've studied this before, and you should have studied this before, that you might have learned that the first step was parentheses. I don't teach that because there are some very, very bad things that can happen if you focus too much on the word parentheses. A parenthesis is one kind of grouping symbol, and so the better way to talk about this is just grouping symbols. And specifically, we're going to simplify whatever is inside the grouping symbol. Okay, we're going to simplify inside the insides of the grouping symbol. That's our first step. Second step are exponents. Now, as we go through our class, we're going to learn other things that go with exponents. For example, radicals, or these things called logarithms, which you haven't studied in math class before. All of those things go together in the exponent step. For right now, we're just going to put exponents, and we'll limit ourselves to that in the types of problems we're going to do for the next day or two. After exponent is multiplication and division. So we do both of those at the same time. But now you might ask yourself, well, doesn't that put us right back in this scenario? If I have a multiply and I have a divide, how do I know which one to do first? And so the clarifying statement is that we always do this from left to right. Always from left to right. So when we have multiplication and division, we always do it from left to right. And then last but not least, we have addition and subtraction. And same thing, we always do this from left to right, okay? Now, it's really important that you make sure that you're good with the fact that there are only 4 steps and that these are the 4 steps: grouping symbols, exponents, multiplication and division from left to right, addition and subtraction from left to right, okay? So it's important that you know those are the 4 steps. There's only 4 steps, and that they have some clarifying statements associated with them. If you're not comfortable with that fact, then you're going to run into issues and you're going to run into problems. All right. There will be a second example or a second video where we do some examples. This video is just the theory. So here is the theory for order of operations, right? Now, it's possible in a previous math class, you might have learned an easy way to remember the order of operations, and it's using a mnemonic. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Okay, so that might be something that you've learned. The P stands parentheses. Okay, but we know it's not just parentheses, it's all grouping symbols. And so that's not how you spell symbols. Symbols, it's all grouping symbols. And so I tend to remember this not as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, but as gosh, excuse my dear Aunt Sally, with my good Midwestern explicative there. So gosh, excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Okay, she just embarrasses me all the time. Gosh, I can't believe she did that again. Excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Okay, the E in excuse stands for exponents. Now again, this is a spot where it gets tricky. If all you remember is this expression, you might forget that these two things go together. That's one step. Multiply and divide from left to right. Okay, that's one step. And the same thing here, Aunt Sally is one step, add and subtract. Okay, so I can't emphasize enough, if you learned that expression, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, that's a good way to remember it. I learned it that way back when I took algebra. It's been around for years and years and years. It's a great way to remember this, but be careful because it's all grouping symbols, and multiplication and division go together. Addition and subtraction go together. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. Okay, so that's the theory behind order of operations. Like I said, watch the next video if you need some examples. Now, the second topic was distributive property. And specifically, it's the distributive property of real number multiplication over addition. So what that means is I'm dealing with real numbers, and I have a multiply and also an addition, a multiply and also an addition. Now, if we're using order of operations would say do what's inside the grouping symbol first. So 3 plus 4 would give me 7. And then do exponents. Well, there aren't any exponents. Then do multiplies. 3 times 7 is 21. And then we're done. There's no additions or subtractions or divisions. Okay, so that would be doing it with order of operations. But the distributive property is a shortcut or a way around the order of operations. Because it's not an order of operation method, it's something that doesn't always work. And that's why the name is so big. The name tells you exactly when it works. It works when you have real numbers. Well, in the last video, we talked about real numbers. It also works when you are doing a multiplication over an addition. Okay, now it could also be a subtraction because it's add and subtract in the same step. So it could be multiplication over subtraction. For that matter, it could be division because you also multiply and divide in the same step. So it could be a division over. Okay, so there's lots of ways you can do it, but notice what you cannot have. You cannot have exponents. You can't distribute exponents. That's not how this particular rule works. So as you know from other algebra classes, the way this works is I'm going to send the 3 on the outside into both things in the parenthesis. So I'll have a 3 times 3, and then I'll also have a 3 times 4 when I send this in. So when I send it in, 3 times 3. When I send this in, 3 times 4. Now I do correct order of operations. Multiplies come first from left to right. So 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 4 is 12. And then addition gives me 21. Notice I do get the same answer. And that's the reason why this is a property that we're allowed to use. You will always get the same answer. Again, there's more examples in the other videos if you need some examples. These are 2 topics that you've studied quite a lot in your previous algebra classes. So probably that's enough for you. All right, so what were the learning objectives, main takeaways? Order of operations, make sure you understand there are 4 steps, and that the first step is grouping symbols, not just parentheses, exponents, multiply and divide from left to right, add and subtract from left to right. That's our first learning objective. Second learning objective is the distributive property, and it only works when we have a multiply and divide on the outside of the parentheses, and we're sending it to an addition or a subtraction on the inside of the parentheses. It doesn't work when we have exponents or other things of that nature. All right, so this is the first theory video for simplifying numerical expressions. If you need some examples, watch the next video. Thank you very much.